First of all, let me thank Bashir, who so kindly invited me to speak to you today. I want to talk about what we need as therapists to be effective healers. Since relational damage is the core of trauma, the relationship is the core of healing trauma. Regardless of the model of therapy you use, the key to a better outcome is the relationship. The quality of the alliance is one of the strongest predictors of successful psychotherapy. There's little evidence for meaningful differences in effectiveness between treatment models, but there's a lot of evidence for differences between therapists within each model. Patients with the best therapists change 10 times faster than the average patient, but patients with the worst therapists actually get worse. So the thing that's amazing is that the differences in outcome are far greater between therapists within a model than the differences are in outcome between therapy models. So, what differentiates the best therapist from the rest? Deliberate practice of relational skills. Your model actually doesn't guarantee your effectiveness. Your relational skills are what will make you effective. But don't we all have relational skills? Of course. Everyone knows how to relate to people. After all, that's how children survive, learning to relate to the people on whom they depend. So the question becomes this: what relational skills do we have, and what results do they create? Now, all of our patients, of course, have relational skills, but most of them learn skills that were designed to co-create insecure attachments. They grew up in insecure relationships where they were often hurt, abandoned, physically or sexually abused, or neglected. Since they learned that relationships lead to pain, they act accordingly. So when therapy begins, you're offering a secure attachment. But they use the same skills that were adaptive in their original traumatic relationships. By doing so, they collaborate perfectly. They are showing us the insecure attachment behaviors that create the problems for which they seek our help. So let me just say that again. The patient, by using defenses, by demonstrating insecure attachment patterns, is already collaborating perfectly in therapy. So our focus then has to turn to the therapist's relational skills. As therapists, can we identify insecure attachment behaviors in patients? Do we know how to create and secure and encourage attachment behaviors? Or are we encouraging behaviors that would lead to a misalliance? Any insecure attachment behaviors we don't see will increase the chances of a misalliance. And if we take their automatic or habitual behaviors personally, we will co-create a misalliance. So what's the solution? The solution is that we can develop skills to recognize potential misalliance behaviors, what we call defenses. And we can learn to block those defenses and then invite and promote secure attachment behaviors that will create a therapeutic alliance. So the vast majority of our patients will benefit when you persistently encourage engagement rather than challenge resistance. But there's a lot of myths about the skills we need. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those myths. I'm reminded of a teacher once who said, all you need to do is log enough hours. But in reality, time doesn't create a good relationship. Good relating creates a good relationship. It's not the amount of time, it's what you do with the time that you have with the patient. For instance, if you just passively wait, that just merely reinforces passivity, not a secure attachment. We've seen patients who've been in therapy for decades, but they never formed a secure therapeutic alliance. How can that be? The more we practice something, the better we get at it. So the question is the patient practicing good relating or bad relating in therapy? Another myth: all you need is good social skills and be a warm person. Well, in reality, in graduate school, I was really afraid of my first placement because I'd actually never worked as a therapist before. So I brought up my concerns to my teacher, and she said, well, if your social skills have taken you this far, they'll take you through this. But My social skills didn't tell me how to respond when a schizophrenic patient hallucinated a devil in my office, right? So if social skills were enough, in fact, the patient's friends and family would already have healed him. And if social skills were enough, all therapists would have great outcomes. But we don't. The top 20% of therapists are more consistently effective than the other 80% combined. It's not general social skills, but it's specific therapeutic skills that account for that difference. Another myth: the patient didn't want to do therapy. In reality, every patient response is how the patient is already doing therapy. It's just that the patient is not doing therapy the way you want. It's not the patient's job to do therapy your way. It's the patient's job to show us how he relates to everyone. And the patient always does this very well. But when the patient responds in a way we don't like, we may think he's doing therapy wrong. In fact, he's doing therapy right. He's showing us the precise problems he needs help with. You might say that his defenses and avoidance strategies are really his implicit relational learning. They're the ways he's learned to relate in an insecure attachment. For instance, when we ask the patient what he wants to work on, and he says he doesn't have a problem, you might get frustrated. And then you might think, he doesn't want to do therapy with us. But in fact, every patient response, no matter how peculiar, perfectly expresses her need for help. Our job is to figure out how and why her answer perfectly expressed her need for help. For instance, I asked the patient, what's the problem you wanted help with? She became incredibly anxious, flooded with anxiety, couldn't tell me what her problem was. Later, I learned that when she needed help from her father one time, he pointed a gun at her head. So, did she respond incorrectly? No. Her response was a perfect expression of her history of suffering. So, we often get frustrated because we're waiting for the patient we want to work with rather than work with the patient we have. In fact, when we say the patient is resisting therapy, often we're resisting the patient in the responses she asks us to help her with. Another myth: the patient's not motivated to do therapy. Patients always have multiple motivations. Our job is to figure out what those motivations are. People who are not in conflict don't come to therapy. Patients come to you precisely because they're in conflict. They want change and they fear it. They want to face what they avoid and they're afraid to face it. They want to work with you and they fear that they'll be hurt if they do. Patients are always motivated. That's not the problem. The problem is that they have motivations that are in conflict. And that's not an obstacle to therapy. It's the reason for therapy. People come to therapy because they're in conflict. Only a fantasy patient wants to get better and has no conflict about it. Real patients want change and fear it. But therapists can get frustrated when a real patient shows up with real conflict. And out of frustration, the therapist may see only the resistance, but not the patient's wish to get well. Then the therapist might claim this patient's not motivated. But that's not true. The therapist sees only one part of the patient's conflict and mistakes that part for the whole. Patients are almost always motivated to do therapy. After all, they're in your office. So their motivation is not the problem. The problem is that they're always in conflict about co-creating a relationship. So in a way, when you see the patient's anxiety, you see the patient's defenses, the patient is implicitly asking, if I reveal my problems to you, will you judge me? Will you punish me? Will you hurt me? Will you abuse me? Will you abandon me? Patients want a new relationship with you, but they fear an old relationship they had with someone else. They're motivated to do therapy. They're just not motivated to have a bad relationship like ones they had in the past. Since they don't know how to create a secure attachment for positive change, they need your help. So it's really important. Patients are not resisting you. They are not resisting therapy. They're resisting the bad relationship they fear they'll have with you. When they relate to the bad relationship they fear, they can't have the therapeutic alliance they want with you. That's why it makes no sense to encourage the patient to have a relationship with you if he fears it will be bad. That's why we need to figure out the tragic expectations from the past that get stirred up in the present in all his relationships. Only then can the relationship with you become safe enough for the patient to reveal all of his feelings to you. Now, in the coming days, you're going to be learning the relational skills you need to form a healing relationship with your patients. No matter what kind of therapy you practice, whether it's CBT, psychoanalysis, DBT, EMDR, no matter what you do, all of you have to be able to regulate a patient's anxiety if it gets too high. All of you need to help the patient develop a therapeutic focus. And all of you need to develop a therapeutic alliance so that the two of you are working together. These skill studies I've developed will help you do just that. And I leave you in good hands with Julie Cochran today, who will teach you those skills. I hope you enjoy your increased skills in the coming weeks, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future. I'd like to thank you for listening to me today, and a special thanks to Bashir for inviting me to speak to you. Thank you so much.